All right. So today, well, let's just quickly check. Is everybody able to hear me? Everyone able to see my screen? You should now be able to see what I'm doing on my screen. If you are having a problem, please put your hand up or ask questions in the question box. We do have somebody on the call who is able to answer those questions while I'm talking and to help you. And again, if you have any problems accessing the program website itself or the webinar, please contact our support desk. I think you know those numbers and email addresses that you can contact. Let me just check if we're all here. Yeah, it looks like most of us are here. So I think let's get started with the day. Nobody's mentioned they can't hear me or can't see me, so I think we are ready to go. All right, so just to orientate you again, we are today going to start with the introduction, and we start with a module called Why Data Protection is Important. There you can see the main issues that we're going to be covering, or main topics we'll be covering. I plan to talk for about 25 to 30 minutes about these different aspects, and then there'll be an opportunity for discussion and for questions at the end for about 10 minutes. I'm hoping to keep today's session to about 40 minutes. I know we're all busy and have many things to do. So I'm going to then take you through, if we click over there, we're going to get to the introduction page. And this page is just a brief introduction and sets out the modules that are part of the introduction, which you'll see are those 4 modules. And just a reminder again that the program index is on the right-hand side and will follow you down the page. And there you are able to navigate to the different modules in the introduction. But let's move across and start with why data protection is important, the first module. And for me, this is a very important question and a very important thing to start with. And uh, there's a fantastic book called Start With Why, written by somebody called Simon Sinek, which I really recommend to everybody. It's one of those books that really has a big impact on you and impacts all aspects of your life. And essentially, it's about starting with asking, why are we doing something? And so I asked the question, why is data protection important? Why do parliaments around the world enact data protection laws? Sorry, just a second. Sorry about that. Someone's just alerted me to the fact that you weren't able to see my screen, which is obviously a problem. So now I can see, sorry, I've seen in the question section that was what the problem was, but now you can. So let me quickly recap where we were and make sure that you can follow where we were. So as I was saying, we're in the data protection program and we are looking now at the introduction section, and today we're dealing with why data protection is important. There's the module over there, and if you click through over there or through the introduction, we get to the introduction page, which sets out a brief introduction and the 4 modules that are in the introduction with why data protection is important over there. Here's the program index where you're able to navigate to the different modules of the introduction. And if we click then on data protection is important, we land on this page, which is the module dealing with why data protection is important. And yeah, so I was talking about Simon Sinek's book and why it's important. Why do parliaments enact data protection laws and why is it important that we comply with them? So I'm going to flip across at this point to our presentation dealing with data protection, and I'm going to zoom in on this area, which is talking about why it's important. So essentially the reason why it's important is that it protects people from harm. And this is something that we're very passionate about and is obviously an important thing. No one wants others to suffer. And I think it's worthwhile going through some examples of the harm people can suffer, looking at what type of harm it is, and discussing that. So the first kind of harm that people suffer is that their money gets stolen, or a thief uses their access to credit to use and take money out of a loan, for example. And here there are lots of examples, and I could go on all day, and I'm sure that you know of people who have had their money stolen, and it might even have happened to you. But one example is two elderly women that I'm aware of and friends with who both have had money stolen out of their bank account. Large sums of money, sort of 65,000 and 100,000 rand. And what would have happened to them, and consider that's a large and a significant part of their retirement saving. What would have happened is that they would have received a phishing email from a criminal, which would have looked a little bit like this. And the criminal sends the phishing email, which looks very convincing. It looks like it's from a bank. And you then click on the link and log in, and you provide all your login details, including PINs, to the thief, who then simply uses that information to log into the bank account and transfer money out of your bank account into their bank account. It's a very easy way of doing it, and there are a large number of people who do fall victim to this. This one we're looking at here is actually a phishing scam that was sent to my mother-in-law. She did click on the link and she did provide her details, and I think she lost about 3,500 rand as a result of this. This is a quick example of why spam filters can be very useful. This is one of those examples of a criminal sending me an email pretending to be from Capitec, and the spam filter provides you with a great message saying, be careful of this message, it looks like there's a problem with it. So to flip back to the program website, you can read some more examples there. There's a friend of mine who had a bank account in Zurich. He lost 150,000 euros. That was a very interesting story, but there are many. But I also wanted to show you this screenshot of where, again, it's Standard Bank. They send out notifications to their customers warning them of phishing scams. This is something that they're obliged to do by various different laws, but it is good to be aware of it as an individual and to make other people aware of this, and that's what banks do, is make people aware of the possibility and the risks. All right, the next example of people suffering harm is physical assault. So not just losing money or suffering financial harm, but somebody actually suffering bodily harm. And there's one key example here, and that's when the South African National Roads Agency Limited, or SANRAL, provided a facility on their website that enabled people to log into the website. You didn't need to log in or authenticate yourself. You could simply go to their website, put in a car registration number, and it would tell you which gantries in Gauteng that car had traveled through. So no authentication. If I knew your car registration number, I could go and check which gantries you'd been under. And SANRAL provided this facility, and And very soon there was a lot of negative feedback in the media. The media picked up on various security flaws and pointed out the risks associated with it. Sandrail at first weren't convinced, but very quickly they took down the site and acknowledged that there were serious privacy concerns with the facility they had made available. And to give you an example of what could happen here, it was around the time that Barack Obama was in South Africa, and people could go and check to see where he was moving around Gauteng as his cavalcade moved around. Another good example is, let's say there's a husband and wife who are recently separated. They are they don't have a good relationship, and he obviously knows her car registration number. He can then go to the facility and look at where she's been traveling. He might then notice that on Wednesday nights she travels to the West Rand, and he then in his head has information that there is somebody who maybe she's started a relationship with that also lives on the West Rand. He's able to put two and two together and then physically assaults her. So it's a good example where a breach of personal information can result in physical harm. There's also the other great example is the Ashley Madison hack, which for those of you who don't know Ashley Madison, it was a website where people could have an affair. It's sort of a dating site for people wanting to cheat on their spouse. Their tagline was, "Life is short, have an affair." And hacktivists or hackers who are activists didn't like the website, so they hacked the Ashley Madison website, got the database, published it on the website, and provided a search facility so that people could go and check whether their spouse or partner's been cheating on them. And as you can imagine, it had very serious consequences. A lot of marriages got broken up or ended. Various people committed suicide as well. So good examples of bodily harm. Other good examples are obviously if you tell somebody that they're HIV positive when they're not HIV positive, that also can result in various things happening. So you have to be very careful, and that's good examples. So if we go back to the program website, you will notice that we've given you links here to different articles where you're able to go and read more about some of these examples that I've given. For example, there's a link to the Sandrail website that will give you a lot more details about that. There's the link there, for example, which talks about what happened with Sandrail, and it's very interesting if you'd like to read more about that. The other great example that I wanted to give is really about cybercrime, but it's also about protecting personal information. And in this example where a couple got robbed by hackers when they were trying to buy a house, you can see I'm pointing out the link over there, which takes you to this article, which gives you quite a good account of what happened. But let me quickly describe it to you. So, because we actually were contacted by this couple and a few other couples who had similar experiences. So what happens to them is they are looking to buy a house and they find their dream house. Put in an offer and the offer is accepted. The offer says that they must pay a deposit of, let's say, 250,000 Rand, which is normally 10% of the purchase price, within 10 days. They then receive an email from what they think is the transferring attorney, from the transferring attorney's domain, saying, "Congratulations on your purchase. We refer to clause 5 in the agreement in terms of which you must pay a deposit. Please transfer this money. Our bank details are attached." And it's from the transferring attorney, what appears to be. So they then pay the money, only to be contacted a few days later by the transferring attorney, the real transferring attorney, asking them to pay the deposit. And they say, no, we've already paid the deposit. And of course, it's too late because they paid a thief the deposit. They didn't pay the transferring attorney the deposit. So then they have a problem because if they don't pay again, they lose the house. And in many instances, that's what's happened. People have not been able to pay the deposit again. Therefore, the seller terminates the agreement and the sale falls through. And in that scenario, you obviously have a criminal who's stolen their money, but you also, in that scenario, have somebody who has failed to protect that couple's personal information. And in an example like this, it's either the estate agent, or it is a bond originator, or a bank who has assessed whether to give them finance or not, or it could be the transferring attorney. It's very difficult to know, and they're all potential responsible parties who should be protecting their personal information. All right, the next way people suffer harm is having their identity stolen. And identity theft is a very common occurrence. South Africa is one of the worst countries in the world for identity theft. And it really is tragic. And we've been contacted by many people who find themselves in a very tricky situation where they almost can't prove that they're the real person. The thief has ID books, passports, bank statements, really has hijacked their identity. And the thief then incurs credit. They get small loans, small personal loans. They can open further bank accounts. They can do all sorts of things. And it means that the person who's lost their identity can't get visas, can't get credit, can't open bank accounts, gets blacklisted. And it really has a very severe impact on people. Lots of people have experienced this. Lots of people know people who've been victims of identity theft. All right, the next thing we are trying to prevent is discrimination. And data protection law is particularly concerned if somebody is deciding, well, let's make a database of all the bald people in South Africa or in the world. And what are we going to do with that information? Or profiles people very, very accurately and then starts to treat those people differently, discriminating on them in different ways based on physical characteristics or simply personal information. Either people with a particular religious affiliation or who belong to political parties or various other grounds. And there's obviously the world doesn't have a good record when it comes to discrimination, and it's any laws and steps that can help to stop discrimination are important. And certainly data protection laws are one of those laws. Then data protection law is also trying to prevent direct marketers from being a nuisance. It's trying to stop those phone calls you get offering you various different things. It's trying to stop the SMSs that you get and emails to an extent, although technology really has solved the problem of spam to a large extent through spam filters. But one good example here, this is really starting to get and look at it's trying to stop people creating a narrow view for you or controlling your reality. And this is going to become a bigger and bigger issue, and for me is possibly one of the biggest issues when it comes to why data protection is important, is that, well, let me give you an example to explain it, and it's Google Remarketing. The link is there, and you can go and read more about Google Remarketing over here. But essentially what it does is that if you go to an online store and you look at a microphone that you're thinking of buying, and you then leave the online store and you go on your way on the internet. So you might go to Facebook, you might go to your mail, you might go to a forum, you might go to various other places, and even Google itself when you go back and search in Google. What it then does is it displays ads that relate to what you've been looking at on that website. We actually saw it in last week's webinar when we were looking at speed test and testing speeds. All the ads displayed around that speed test were things that I've been looking at, and that's Google remarketing at work. So what's happening here is that Google and marketers are in essence controlling your reality. And what's going to be happening going forward is that your car is also going to have an Android system in it, and your car will start remarketing to you. So your car will tell you, hey, John, that microphone you were looking at on the online store, that's coming up for sale in a shop 100 meters on your right. Why don't you stop and buy it? Also, when you drive down the road, the billboards are going to change based on knowing that it's you and knowing that you were looking at that microphone. So before long, you start believing that the only microphone in the whole world is that one microphone that you looked at. And obviously, this might not be so relevant to microphones, but when you start getting to things like political views and very much fake news comes into this as well. So for me, that's probably one of the most important things that direct marketing is wanting, that data protection laws are wanting to stop. It's to give the power back to the data subject, enable us to control our reality, control what we see, what we're exposed to, as opposed to others deciding what we see. I think it's very important. So those are some of the reasons why data protection law is so important. I'm very passionate about protecting people from harm. And it's one of the reasons why I do workshops and do this program, is that I truly believe that it's an important thing to do. And in the information society that we live in, where information rights are so important, it really is a very significant issue in protecting people and creating a better, safer society. And that's why I focus on this issue and do so much work in it. All right, so let's now go to the challenge when it comes to data protection compliance. This is the next section that I wanted to deal with. And I'm going to jump across to our presentation. And go to this section. And really the challenge is this. It's how do we take practical, effective action to protect personal information at the lowest cost and then get business value out of those efforts? But, we've been consulting with many organizations for many years, and there are many organizations who are spending millions, hundreds of millions on data protection compliance. And often what we've seen is that organizations, they get sidetracked in many respects. They end up doing many things that aren't necessarily going to protect personal information, aren't going to achieve our objective of protecting people from harm. So this is the challenge to you, is you've got to look at your organization, what budget do you have, and what action can you actually take to protect it at the lowest cost? What is the low-hanging fruit? What's the quick wins that you can achieve? And I think an important thing here for me is always to ask yourself the question, okay, I'm going to be doing this for data protection compliance. Is this actually going to mean that I protect personal information and protect people from harm? Is there a connection? Can I clearly see the connection? And if you can, then you're on the right track. If you can't, then you need to be asking yourself, should I actually be doing this thing? Is it really going to be of assistance? I want to give you a quick example of real practical effective action, because examples are always a good thing to look at. This is a statement that I received from a bank in the UK, and the letter arrives and it looks like that. You can see it's got my name and address on it, which is the only personal information on it. They've been careful because the envelope does not advertise that it's from a bank. You can't tell it's from a bank. They also don't put on the envelope, this is a bank statement. If you're an identity thief, you want this piece of personal information. It's very bland, nothing that identifies it. Very clever. It's trying not to draw attention to it with people. Then my name and address is printed on the letter itself. It's not on the envelope. So if I take the statement out, I'm left with an envelope that has no personal information on it, and I can discard it without being concerned or worried. What they've also done then is in the window when the statement is removed, it says, if you change address, please let us know. And one of the conditions or principles of data protection law is allowing a data subject to participate, correct their personal information, but also there's a duty on you as a responsible party to verify and check that you have accurate personal information. And that's what they're doing here. They're complying with those two conditions as part of this process of sending out statements. A very good example of practical effective action. And remember that data protection law requires you to protect personal information in both electronic and physical form. Many people forget that it relates to physical form as well. Then a few more points. Many people feel overwhelmed by data protection compliance. It is achievable. As I think I've mentioned, the law does not require you to protect all personal information all the time. It requires you essentially to do what's reasonably practicable to protect personal information. And if you're doing that, you are then complying with the relevant data protection law. We'll talk about that a bit more just now. But so data protection laws are not tick box kind of laws. You can't go tick, 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 done, and you're then finished. It's an ongoing process that you have to continually monitor and work out how to protect personal information as you process it. All right, I quickly want to check in and see if there are any questions. No, there are no questions. We're almost finished with my section, and then I'll hand over to you guys to ask questions and to have any discussion that we would want to have. So the next bit is to look at some myth busters. And what we've noticed over the years is that there are many myths when it comes to data protection. And we want to bust those myths today because, and I think this is very suited to being a topic to deal with right at the beginning. So this is the list of myths that we have made. Let's see if I can make that a bit bigger for you. No, I can't. So maybe what I can do, there we go, that should help. So let's go through these myths and talk about them. The first is that there are many ways to lawfully process personal information. There often, with data protection law, there isn't one correct answer. There are multiple correct answers. And people get quite frustrated with this because they do get multiple answers from lawyers. But there are many different ways of lawfully processing. Then the law doesn't say you cannot process personal information. It simply says, here are some conditions that you must comply with when processing it. The laws actually recognize that there has to be a free flow of personal information. And really it's a balance between information flowing freely and being protected at the same time. And that's an issue we'll deal with in the next module when we look at the balancing of rights and interests. But the key thing here is that data protection law doesn't mean the end of processing personal information. That would be ridiculous. It would stop commerce. It would stop us functioning in the world. And for the same reasons, it doesn't mean the end of direct marketing. Many direct marketers have been very worried that their business is at risk. And certainly if you're a very bad direct marketer, it might have that impact, but not to most direct marketers. Then the fourth one is that you should do what is reasonably practicable to protect personal information, not everything under the sun. And this is very much to my point that the law does not require you to protect all personal information all the time. That's just not achievable and not what the law requires you to do. Then it's also very unlikely that anyone's going to go to jail for unlawfully processing personal information. There are many people at the moment who really do use the scare tactic of if you don't do this, if you don't come to my workshop, if you don't buy my product, you're going straight to jail and you're going to stay there forever. It's very unlikely that someone will go to jail. So don't be concerned, don't be worried. It really is not, well, it's a very unlikely thing that could happen. The next is that there is time to comply. Many people as well, and this is why the myths are out there of trying to get you to do things and saying, well, you know, the deadline's tomorrow. You've got very little time left. You have to be doing things by a certain time. And that's not true. There is time to comply. And there's no need to panic. There's no need to rush even. We can work through it methodically. There is time within which to comply. The next is that you should be mapping the personal information that you process. We're going to be talking a lot about this in more detail in the program. We don't believe you should be mapping the flows of personal information in your organization. You must map activities. You can't map data flows in isolation. We'll be talking a lot more about this, but it's a key issue and an important thing to bear in mind. Then data protection law is not just an IT issue, and we're constantly amazed at how often it's somebody in the IT department who becomes aware of data protection and starts saying we need to do something about it, and it gets seen in an organization that it's an IT issue. It's not an IT issue, it's an information issue. It's much broader than just the IT department. Then the other mythbuster is that you can transfer and store information overseas. It can go across borders, and you can use the cloud. There are some considerations. There are things you need to be aware of, but generally speaking, you can. This is another issue we're going to be looking at in a lot more detail. And the last one is that data protection laws apply in the public and the private sector, public and private bodies. What's interesting in South Africa as well is that access to information laws or freedom of information laws apply to public and private bodies as well. In most other countries, it only applies to public bodies, not private bodies. So in some other countries, like in Europe or in the UK, some people think, well, freedom of information and protection of personal information are only relevant to public bodies. And of course, that's not true either. Private bodies definitely are obliged to protect personal information, but often public bodies don't realize this as well. There are lots of government departments that are not good at protecting personal information, and is an important issue. All right, so let's back to the program website. We're almost, we're sure half an hour's flown by. But what I want to end with before I then hand over to you guys to see if there are any questions or have a discussion about any issues is to look at some action items coming out of this module. Each week we will have some action items. You can look at it as homework if you like, but some things that you should really be doing in the next week in the build up to the next webinar. So the action items for this module are that you should take steps yourself to protect yourself from harm. There are various things you can do. You can read more about this on our website. You can also consider using a password manager like 1Password or LastPass. The links are there in the program. There's the website for 1Password, which is a fantastic system that I use. You can also use LastPass, which is a great way of having very secure passwords, a different password for every account, and enables you to remember your passwords. It's a very good way to combat cybercrime in having strong, unique passwords. Then you can look at running awareness campaigns throughout your organization on why data protection is such an important issue. We so often find that if you can explain why it's important to people in your organization, and if the penny drops and they realize, oh, okay, we're protecting people from harm, people like my mother, people like my father, my grandparents, I'm protecting them from harm, then they get it, and they're much more likely and are much more likely to take it seriously. Then you can also consider running an awareness campaign with your employees to help them protect themselves from harm. So what some organizations do here is either send out internal emails. They might have an internal mailing list or a mailer that goes out on a regular basis, or posters in the organization, or notice boards, or weekly meetings, or various different forum where employees gather. And here it's not about awareness about why the organization must protect personal information. It's specifically saying to employees, you could suffer harm, and here are some things you can do, and these are the kinds of harm you could suffer, and these are the things you as an employee or as a person should be doing to protect yourself. What we've then seen is that often employees are very grateful to the employer. They're fantastic. They see what it could be. Their lives are made easier through using things like password managers, and then they've also got a much greater appreciation of why it's important for the organization and for them to protect the personal information of others. So it's sort of look after yourself first, and then you get an appreciation of why you want to do the same for other people. Then you can also let victims of identity theft know the steps they can take to protect themselves, and also you can check from time to time whether you've been a victim of identity theft. A great example there is you can, and you should do it regularly, is at least once a year, is get a free credit report on yourself from various credit bureaus. And it's often a very interesting document to look at, because if for example, there've been a whole lot of checks on your credit record from places that you have not been to, there's a good chance that there's a criminal who's trying to buy a sofa at some store, and they're doing a credit check to see whether you're good for the money. So it's a very good way to check if there is a problem. And then the last action item for this week is, as part of the program, you're entitled to attend one live workshop on data protection. And so it's to consider whether you would like to attend it, when you might attend, and you'll see there's the link which takes you through to this page where the details are of the workshops that we're running. At the moment, we've got GDPR workshops and workshops on the POPI Act that are coming up. Particularly in June, we've got ones in Cape Town and Johannesburg for the POPI Act. We've also, on the 15th of June, there is a GDPR workshop that's happening in Milan in Italy. We will be there at the workshop, and it's going to be a fantastic event with speakers from all around the world talking about the European General Data Protection Regulation. A really fantastic event. If you can get to Italy, attendance is free. There's no charge in attending, but obviously it's to get there, which flights, visas, accommodation does add up. But if you are particularly interested in the GDPR and the application of that on your organization, it really is going to be a fantastic event. All right, I think that's what I wanted to cover from today's session. I think we've covered everything from me. So maybe I can ask if you've got any questions. We can chat about that there. So I see there are some questions. So a good recommendation from one of the attendees is saying that I'd recommend signing up to Experian. For about 220 Rand per year, you get email notifications whenever someone touches your record, much cheaper than TransUnion and still as popular. So that's fantastic. That is a very, very good recommendation. You know, there's one thing where you proactively have to go and check your credit record. If you are able to be alerted or receive notifications as soon as that happens, it's much more powerful, because you never know when somebody is, and you're able to take action as immediately as you get that alert. So I think that is a fantastic idea and a very good recommendation. Are there any other questions that anybody has, or would anyone like to address everybody? All right, there don't seem to be any other questions at this time. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us again. Please have a look at those action items. You will be receiving an email. I think it'll be later in the week with the details of next week's webinar. Next week we are going to be tackling the next module, which is about balancing information rights. Another great session that I'm looking forward to. So unless anyone has any last questions or wants to discuss anything, let's sign off, and I look forward to next week. All right, no other questions. So goodbye, and thank you very much for attending.